Hello, and welcome to the Metta Hour podcast with Sharon Salzberg. I'm Lily Cushman, and I produce this podcast. Today, we're coming to you with episode 251 and the return of Ethan Nichtern, who has not been on the podcast for many, many years. He's back today talking about his new book, Confidence, Holding Your Seat Through Life's 8 Worldly Winds. If you don't know Ethan, he is a Buddhist teacher. He's the host of the Road Home podcast right here on the Be Here Now network. He's written several books, including The Road Home, and has been featured on CNN, NPR, New York Times, Vogue, and The Business Insider. And he and Sharon have done a lot of teaching together in the past. So this is really fun to sit down with these two. The conversation starts with what Ethan's been doing for the past 7 years and kind of how this new book came about, and a lot around the contents of the book, which is the 8 vicissitudes, the 8 worldly winds, and the dichotomy of hope and fear, how we can work with equanimity to hold our seats and stay engaged. There's also a lot of conversation about the positive building of pride, positive sense of pride and confidence and self-respect. So this is a fun conversation, a juicy conversation, a lot of great tools, and Ethan is a wonderful teacher, so we're thrilled to have him back. He closes the conversation with a raising wind horse meditation as well. And before we get into the conversation, a couple of announcements. Here in the US, we are right around the corner from a major election, and Sharon has put together a wonderful election resource hub on her website. If you head over to SharonSalzberg.com, there you will find all kinds of different think pieces, podcast episodes, memes, meditations, all kinds of good stuff to just help you get through election season, or if you're outside the US, to navigate the continuation of unprecedented times and how your practice, how your spiritual life can support that. Okay, so that's all the announcements. Let's get into episode 251, Ethan Nichtern and Sharon Salzberg.
Hello, Ethan, and welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, Sharon. Thanks so much for having me. It's always great to be with you.
It's always great to be with you. I think the last time you were on this podcast was 2017 when your last book came out. Did your last book come out in 2017?
Yeah. Last book came out in 2017. My daughter was born in 2017. So yeah, been a while.
Really? And there's a lot to catch up on. Are you in Brooklyn right now?
And back in Brooklyn after doing some touring for this book, Confidence, and right now it's kind of muggy here, but it's always nice to leave Brooklyn, and it's always nice to come back. That's how I feel about it.
So there's been a lot of life happening since your last book came out, like a pandemic, and you had become a father. And why don't we start with where your teaching has evolved in these recent years? What forms, what mediums you're focusing on there, and how you're working with people?
Oh yeah, that's a great question and reflection. I mean, a lot has happened in my life, in the last 7 years. Co-raising a daughter. The main, I've always been part of multiple spiritual communities, but the main one that I was part of, the bureaucracy and administration, Shambhala, basically more or less collapsed in 2018. And I stepped down from my position in that community. And then the pandemic happened, and, all of our crazy political years between then and now. So, yeah, I mean, I always think that what I try to do as a teacher, as a writer, is to, one, as I know you do too, obviously, it's kind of pat to say, but try to do what is the most helpful. And, I always feel like both the way I'm most interested in being a teacher and the way I can be the most helpful is to try to create some bridge between ancient teachings and practices and kind of modern conversations, modern applications, if that's the conversation between Buddhist wisdom and modern psychology and neuroscience, if that's the conversation of, between sort of being a mindfulness practitioner and creativity, or culture. Like, my last book was looking at The Princess Bride as a spiritual movie or a spiritual text, and conversation between Buddhist wisdom and, activism and political engagement, things like that. So, I think that's always the approach that I've taken. I think the years, we're recording this in 2024, and the years from 2017 to 2024, I do work with a lot of people in group settings and in private settings, and just realizing, especially with all of the upheaval and difficulties in the world, that this question of how do we show up to our practice, how do we show up to our life with confidence, is really so many of the conversations I've been having, so much of the struggle throughout my own life, and I mean productive struggle, has been around that question of having confidence to show up, especially to hard times. And again, wanting to take that approach of sort of harvesting ancient wisdom and trying to put it in touch with, modern forms of expression, modern life, modern lexicon. That was what guided me. But I do think there's a reason, in everything that's happened in my life and community and the world from 2017 until now, that like confidence was the sort of became an obvious topic to talk about.
So the book that just came out in June of 2024 is called Confidence: Holding Your Seat Through Life's 8 Worldly Winds. And clearly this book was a long time in the making. And I think when we taught together at the Garrison Institute back in 2019, it was just kind of formulating as an idea for a book for you.
Yeah. And I mean, some of that was, there are a lot of different influences. Some of that was actually your influence, and looking at the teaching, which we've talked about before. Lots of teachers talk about it sort of in some level of passing, but you usually refer to it as the vicissitudes. Also gets referred to as the 8 worldly dharmas, and just using that. I always like to kind of start a book with an imagery or a kind of a some kind of core metaphor. So the notion of wind was really sticking with me. And, and also that conversation, that you often teach on, of working with the vicissitudes and developing equanimity, upeksha. And you've often commented about sort of equanimity being a kind of misunderstood or kind of hard to get into word in English. Like, what does that mean? I always remember your voice when you mentioned your teacher saying, be equanimous, and puzzling at that. So, but I really like this idea of these timeless forces. The reason I like talking about them in terms of the 8 worldly winds is, I think of, force, like life hitting us with some force, or our own experience hitting us with some force. and it kind of knocking us around, and that quality of equanimity, rather than being related to like some passivity, it being related to, and I think you've commented on this before, some level of resilience, some level of ability to work with the ways life hits us. And I think life has been very windy in recent years, so to speak. So I think all of that kind of coalesced, and and then there's always an image that kind of strikes me. Sometimes it's a song lyric, sometimes it's I don't know if this kind of sparks how your writing process starts, but like with my book, The Road Home, it was that idea of always being in commute, kind of stuck with me, and the idea of wandering around in our confused state, being like always feeling like you're commuting, never quite arriving home. And for this one, dealing with wind and dealing with the ways life kind of hypes us up and knocks us down. I have always loved, and I've been getting a lot of pictures of it, the going to a car wash or a car dealership, and those large noodle inflatable people outside of car washes who are called tube people or tube men, like sort of getting really excited in the wind or really deflated when the wind stops, and just sort of that, how life strikes us that way, and can either hype us up, when we get something that we want or something we hope for temporarily, and kind of knock us down into despair. And that image of the tube man drooping over it was such a sweet, weird, cool image in my mind, and I was like, oh yeah, that really is what it feels like sometimes when life knocks you around. It's like the drooping tube man outside the car wash.
That's great. I wonder if you could actually give a definition of equanimity in this context.
Yeah. Well, so how I've always heard, because it's taught in relationship to the vicissitudes, or these 8 worldly winds, which I think it was, they are taught as pairs. I think it was a teaching by one of my teachers, Dzogchen Ponla Rinpoche, where he oriented, and he was using something I think Chogyam Trungpa used, which was this notion of noticing, recognizing both hope and fear as actually similar or mirror image experiences of each other. So he was the one who turned them into these Ponla Rinpoche, these 4 pairs of hope and fear, and so pleasure, pain, praise, criticism, fame, and maybe insignificance, depending on how we want to translate that one, and either success and failure, or gain and loss is the last one. And so equanimity, I think, it's interesting because a quality, I think this is part of the reason it's sometimes hard to understand what Buddhist definitions are, because the awakened states of mind are usually taught in relationship to obstacled experiences. So it's almost like until the obstacles that you're dealing with, you don't quite know what the awakened state is. And so, I think of equanimity in the terminology of actually the way I put it in the book, related to one of the metaphors for learning to stay with yourself in meditation, is holding your seat when one of these experiences knocks you. So it's not being disaffected. In fact, I've seen that the sort of near enemy of equanimity a lot of times is numbness or detachment, right? So it's not pretending that pleasure and pain don't affect us at all. It's an ability to experience pleasure and pain without losing our kind of center, losing our touch with the earth, losing touch with our mindfulness through that process. So, I was linking that. I do think you could possibly define, if you look up confidence in the dictionary, You could possibly define confidence as trusting yourself, but I also think you could define equanimity as the trait that allows you to actually trust yourself moving through difficult experiences like pleasure and pain, like praise and criticism, etc. So I think you could, I don't know if you agree with this, you could actually define or translate upeksha as confidence. I don't know if I've heard you say resilience in
No,
relationship to
I
upeksha.
love that you say resilience. When I think of the word confidence, I think of faith.
Yeah.
Which certainly in the Buddhist context doesn't mean something doctrinaire or allegiance or, loyalty to something. It does mean kind of a confidence, which allows us to move forward into the unknown. It's not the same thing as hope, which might be, I'm sure everything's going to work out just the way I want it to. It's different than that.
Yeah. I think if you look at the Latin root, faith is in confidence. That's its sort of most. So that makes a lot of sense. Also, a great book by Sharon Salzberg.
Thank you very much. Well, I love that phrase, holding your seat, because it implies like having a home base within ourselves that we can continually return to.
Yeah. And it was an expression that some of my teachers in the Tibetan and Shambhala tradition, and sometimes my parents would use, right? So there's this notion in starting a meditation practice of taking your seat. And taking your seat, means arranging your posture, but it also means really like arriving, not disappearing from the present moment, and I think that's really so crucial to kind of flip this, what I think is kind of a very widespread misconception about mindfulness, that it's like about disappearing or getting away from our difficult circumstances as humans on earth. And I think taking your seat is really saying, I'm going to show up to this meditation session. I'm going to show up. I'm going to show up maybe even with some sense of another word that's sometimes loaded, pride, or trust or faith in myself. And then holding your seat, was defined as that's coming from, I think Pema Chodron says that meditation is about learning to stay with your own mind, not running from it. So when a difficult experience arises, which the vicissitudes are, they're not difficult by their very nature, but they're forceful by their very nature, right? So when some force, a difficult thought or an emotion or a difficult physical experience in meditation arises, holding your seat means I was able to work with that. I was able to be with it. I didn't necessarily run from it. And then that metaphor among some of the teachers I had in the Shambhala tradition began to be extended to sort of, how you would show up in difficult, circumstances. Like maybe my parents would say to me if there was like a situation in college or when I was young that was difficult, like you can hold your seat with this, which kind of means you can work with it. You can be with the difficulty and learn something. So that's kind of the metaphor. But I also think the metaphor works really well with this idea of the winds of our human experience constantly striking us.
Let's unpack that positive sense of pride for a moment, because of course we don't tend to think of it that way.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting when you look at, the founder of mindfulness meditation, Siddhartha Gautama, there was a real sense, at least when he was a humble, ascetic and wanderer and later monk, but there was also this real sense of regalness, and when you look at a statue of the Buddha, especially when he's post-enlightenment touching the earth in the Bhumi Sparsha or earth touching mudra, it's very soft. It's not like a person ranting, I'm so great, look at me, but there is a kind of boldness to saying like, I am here and the earth is my witness, and I have, attained awakening and cut the ties to, confused ways of being in the world. I mean, that's very proud and confident. And, I think in the way I initially learned meditation and meditation posture, there was this sense of leadership and being in the world, and that when a person took their meditation seat, you should feel like the leader of an enlightened society, assuming their place on the throne. And that's like that's very, like, it's overwhelmingly kind of prideful or positive or confident. And I don't think it needs to be that. It's more, I'm more of an egalitarian, person, but there is more of a sense of, as other teachers have said, like, I belong here. This is my spot. Like, I have a place on this earth. I'm at the center of my life. I have just as much right to be here as anyone else, and, so it's a more democratic approach, which is, I think, exceptionally important. But, it's very powerful to say, oh, this is actually me claiming my spot, more than I'm just trying to disappear from life when I meditate, like I can take up space, as they say,
Well, it's so clear that in different societies, in our dominant culture here in the States, that kind of confidence is based on a lot of different conditioning also, until we work it out in terms of what we can have that sense of innate dignity from within, but it can be very differently interpreted depending on gender, for example.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I think patriarchy, white privilege, white supremacy, all these different systems. And I think that, I do note in the book's introduction, like, a white guy writing a book called Confidence, could be epically misreading, this moment in history. But I wanted to write it with that in mind. And I specifically want to write it because it's actually a struggle that I've had and I go through. And I do think another piece of this is I do think we live in an era where there's a lot of false confidence. One little, since I'm in Brooklyn, one little NYC example of this is the phenomenon known as man spreading, which is if you ride the New York City subway, it's not super defined how big the seats are. But there's actually billboards on the subway saying "Stop man spreading," which is when men spread their legs and take up much more than one seat. I'm also reminded, I think it's interesting that the term con man is actually short for confidence man, right? So I think, we do live in this era of a lot of bluster, a lot of arrogance, a lot of, false male confidence, insecurity. And, so that's definitely in the space as I'm considering these things as well. And it is going to be a very, I want to fully acknowledge, depending on our conditioning and dominant culture, it is going to be a very different experience of how to take our seat, how to claim our spot, etc. So, yeah. But I think that is interesting that the flip of confidence into con man was very much on my mind.
That is interesting. So it sounds like, or I felt, for a while that another word for confidence, another term would be self-respect, which is really considered, it's not considered like conceit. It's really a very, very good thing. So then that brings into my mind the question of ethics and how we live day to day in terms of having, kind of greater self-respect.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's interesting as well. Like the notion of, of respecting ourselves, of dignity, and of our, ethics, which is also having a code of conduct, right? Is like things we say, I'm going to participate in this, things we say, I'm going to refrain from, as being acts of self-respect. It's also interesting to me, having studied classic Buddhism, there's different lists, and it gets down into the weeds of qualities of mind that is helpful or wholesome to cultivate, kushala, and qualities of mind that are unwholesome or unhelpful to cultivate. And, it's coming from a very different cultural perspective. But what I always find interesting is, and I don't know if it might just be the translators chose these words into English, but on the list of wholesome qualities of mind to cultivate are shame and embarrassment. And you always put, like, because we have so many issues with shame in our world, and so many people I know and work with struggle with shame. But the definition of shame from a classic Buddhist standpoint is very different. It's somewhat different, at least. It's because you have so much respect for your own dignity, right, and for your own awakened nature, basically, you avoid degraded behaviors or, degraded actions. And so it's almost like, out of self-respect, you act well. And if you slip up, right, it's not like bad me, it's just, oops, I made a mistake. Shame is a feature that helps you realize, oh, I disrespected myself, And I think that's a really interesting, it's a different cultural difference. But if we already have a sense of confidence, I was thinking about this, like, maybe shame would actually function differently. It would just be like remorse, like, oh gosh, I violated my code of conduct. I caused harm to myself or others. I want to hold myself to a more awakened standard, And embarrassment in that definition is how we surround ourselves with community of dignity, so that if other people say, hey, you messed up, we actually say, oh, I want to uplift my behavior, So I always thought that was interesting, that there's these very different and more positive views in classic Buddhism of what shame and embarrassment look like if we feel our own inherent worthiness already, or our own basic goodness, you could say.
Well, I think that is, such a crucial and essential difference. It's like, there's this beautiful quotation I've heard from the Buddha where he said, if you truly loved yourself, you'd never harm another.
Yeah.
Both because harming another is harming ourselves, and because it is that kind of degradation, as you said, of our potential, which is not just to be mediocre or kind of get by, but it is to be free and kind of amazing, and so when we, hurt somebody, it is like, sort of taking that potential and not fulfilling it, and that sense of shame. It's a very different word. It's a very different concept in the Buddhist tradition. It's not that kind of wholesale condemnation of myself forevermore because I did this thing and that's who I actually am. So I think essentially the difference is that sense of possibility, that even though we're not denying the pain and the difficulty that maybe we caused to ourselves as well, but we can grow, we can move on, we can make amends, whatever it would take, but we're not stuck in that kind of self-identification.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm very curious in that light about how you talk about the cultivation of confidence when trauma, in effect, is in the room, is in the mix.
Yeah, and there's been great work on the relationship between trauma and mindfulness, for sure. And I think, what I think trauma does is that it gets us stuck, right, in certain states of mind, and it's hard for awareness to come in and say, oh, this is just a moment, right now. Right now I'm okay, right? Right now something different is happening. My understanding of one of the things that trauma does is it causes problems in the hippocampus, which is the region of the brain that can separate time fields. So it can say like, that was then, that's not happening now. Now this is happening. And so we kind of get stuck in older, more protective modes. So I think, I think in some ways it's the same work, but it has to be done slower with much more supportive environment, with much more love. And, I do when in the second part of the book, when I talk about the 4 powers of confidence, compassion is the first thing I talk about. And, I don't think I haven't seen a lot of work in things that I've read on why compassion is the doorway to confidence. And I think a lot of what compassion does, especially self-compassion, is it's what reminds us that we are actually worthy, that we are basically good. And I think that reminder has to come with a lot more safety and a lot more support when there's trauma present. It's also, the window of tolerance, as they say, because I do think holding our seat means putting ourselves into situations where it's going to be windy. In other words, where we're going to experience pleasure or pain, or if we have some project that we're trying to develop confidence about, let's say you want to write a book, right? You have to submit that book for feedback, or that manuscript for feedback, which means you are going to experience the winds of praise and criticism, right? So to build that sense of holding our seat, we actually need to put ourselves into windy circumstances. And my understanding of what happens with trauma is there's a kind of level of tolerance of how windy, how much force can hit us before it actually creates a re-traumatizing effect, which means we just need more support. And we need to know going in, if we've heard abusive voices in the past, when I submit myself for feedback, maybe some of those voices from the past will be stronger. And I need to think about, before I go into that space, the supports that I need. That's what I really think is really important, that confidence requires support. That's really the 4 powers of confidence I talk about. They're like pillars of support, and the idea of this, it's interesting to go back to the gender piece. We have this idea of the self-made man, which doesn't exist from a Buddhist standpoint. Everything is interdependent. Things are affecting. So if we want to be able to hold our seat, we all need support. We need community. We might need friends or teachers or therapists to help us and say, okay, let's find your window of tolerance. Let's find that space where you can actually work with the winds in a healthy way. And I think that's the path for all of us. I think my understanding of what happens with trauma is when you go outside the window of tolerance, there can be more damaging effects. We have to be clearer on where our kind of edge of comfort is in that case. But I do think we all need to put ourselves into situations, and the way life works, these are called the worldly, phenomenon, or the worldly winds. To be in a human body, you are going to experience these phenomena. But if you try to show up and do a difficult thing in life, which is really where confidence in kind of our regular lexicon it comes in, if you try to show up and do a difficult thing, it's going to get extra windy, so you need to take your seat with supports, and you need to know, what can I call on here so that I'm actually able to be in this experience? And I think the first thing is just realizing it's going to affect us. I think that's also why I wanted to devote a whole chapter to pleasure and pain, because, what my own experience says, and also what the experiments, the scientific experiments say, is actually when you practice quite a lot of mindfulness, you become more sensitized to pleasure and pain rather than less sensitive to them. You don't anticipate as much, you don't brace against them as much. But when they've studied Richie Davidson, who you obviously know, when he and his team studied master meditators and their response to pain, they noticed that the master meditators were actually more sensitive to pain, right? So this is the interesting thing, is like, I think the way we prepare ourselves to hold our seat is to realize life really affects us. And if we become more present, it's actually going to affect us more. And so we shouldn't pretend that it's affecting us less. And I find when I'm able to know, like, one thing is, public speaking, I do quite a lot of it, but people are sometimes, surprised to find, like, it's always been a little bit of a struggle for me. It's less of a struggle in the sense that I know the terrain much better. But every time I get up in front of a group of people, there's thoughts in my mind of like, this is an inherently awkward exchange. Like, one person is going to get up in front of other people because the other people thinks that that person, who is me, knows something they do not know. Like that's inherently weird.
Yeah.
Actually, right? And just to know, oh, okay, thoughts of concern, like, did I harm anybody? With my words, did I help them? Are people going to like me? Are people going to dislike me? Like, all of these winds are going to strike me. And the more I know that, the better it tends to go, the more I can actually be with it with an open heart. If I just pretend, I've been doing this for years and I'm a teacher and I, practice mindfulness and I'm a Buddhist, so therefore it affects me less. I either suppress the winds or, they knock me over, So I think that's the first thing, is realizing that life actually affects you more the more mindful you become. And that's based on the actual data of coming from the first couple of winds, which I think is the most kind of primal and core to our experience, which is pleasure and pain. Like, we're going to get more sensitive through these practices. And that's actually a good thing. But we have to work with that with support and safety and love for ourselves,
Well, a lot of people that I've encountered do have this idea that if they got really good at meditation, they wouldn't feel pleasure or pain anymore. Everything would kind of dissolve into this gray blob and they would be numb. And some people dread that thought and some people long for it, but it's not what happens anyway. So it doesn't really matter. But I think that window of tolerance is a really crucial element in understanding this, because we may get more sensitive, but we're not reacting in the old ways.
Right.
To hold on to pleasure desperately as though it's going to finally save us or be our salvation, and never change, and push away pain because we're afraid of it, or, we hate it, or we think it's going to last forever unless we try to seize control or whatever it is. And so there's so much possibility for growth and understanding and transformation and how we relate to all of these things.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's also, maybe this is related to the understanding of equanimity. When you get into whatever the positive experience is, right? Success, or I call fame influence, right? Actually being able to have influence with a group of people, with a social group. If you get those things and you hope so desperately, like, I really hope this project X is a success. I think it's good to have hope, whether it's good or bad to have hope. We have it, it's just a human experience. But there's a mirage that goes up with hope. Like, if I get this thing, I will be permanently okay. I will be saved, And on the other side, in our fear, there's usually a false threat in fear. Like, if I have a painful moment, it means the end of me, right? If I fail, it means my life will have been for nothing, right? And actually, it's just another moment. So I think, the more times we go around the block of having the full range of these vicissitudes, there is a little bit of equanimity where you don't get so caught up. You do see kind of the hope and fear in a little bit more what I would call like a little bit more holographically. Like you still want the success, but it's a little bit more like, just like a hologram. It's like, oh, that would be nice, but I'm not going to put all of my eggs in that basket. And then you see the fear and you go, oh yeah, that looks really scary, but I'll probably be able to deal with it and it won't last forever, and maybe that's the meaning of equanimity. One of the questions I've always gotten, and I'm sure you've gotten this, I wanted to turn it back to you, like, if you do start to see the vicissitudes with a little bit more like immateriality, like that hologram, can you really enjoy your life? Can you really live it as fully? That's a question I get from people sometimes. Like, if the hope for success is just like goes from like, I gotta have this to, yeah, that would be nice, like, is that like living less fully? It feels a little disappointing to say, oh, the vicissitudes might become a little less, solid in your chase or in your, bracing against them. Do you get questions of like sort of disappointment?
Well, yeah, I get questions of fear, like, were I to lose my, ambition,
right?
Would I, who would I be, or how would I be? Or, artists say the same thing, can great art only come from great suffering? Do I have to be in torment in order to create beautifully? Or, so many questions like that. And I think we live more fully, really, both because all the things we compromised and didn't even notice because we were hell bent on someone else's notion of what success should look like, which is really an interesting, conceptualization. I thought about that some years ago about fame. I thought, oh, fame is actually something that exists only in other people's minds.
Yes.
Like, I don't wake up in the morning and say, I am more famous. It's like more people maybe know my name than before, or more people know me than I know. It's all happening somewhere else. So it's not actually fulfilling anything in me, but we long for it, in some strange way. So I think the more we understand kind of the nature of where our deeper happiness is going to come from, the better life feels.
Yeah. It's interesting, the relationship between being ambitious and just kind of doing what you do and doing what you long for and just going for it because of that. Funnily enough, you're actually in the chapter on fame or influence and insignificance. I don't know if you remember that story, but I believe we were. It was just a funny, weird little turn of a phrase.
I did read that in your book, and it is a funny story.
Yeah, we were. I think we were on the Upper West Side of Manhattan eating dinner, and the waitress knew who you were and had read your books, and also listened to your guided audio meditations, for sleep aid, actually. And she said she was, kind of fangirling a little, as the kids might say, over you. And she said to you, isn't it funny how many people listen to your voice? And then she said that the kind of awkward, funny part, she said, isn't it funny how many people listen to your voice in bed?
Yeah, so many people go to bed with you every night.
So many people go to bed with you every night. It was something like that.
Yeah. It was really funny. It's great. Thank you for reminding me of the story. It also reminds me of, like, in the very beginning of kind of audio books and things like that. And this woman said to me, I'm taking you to Italy with me this summer. And I thought, well, that's very generous of you. And then I realized she was taking like a CD or something.
Do you need my frequent flyer information?
Yeah, really. Yeah, really. When are we leaving? So it is very funny. I want to go back for a moment to the 4 powers of confidence, which you map out in the book. They are compassion, lineage, awareness, and wind horse. And I wonder if first you can share where these are from.
Yeah. So this is kind of where kind of the ancient wisdom meets my interpretation. So there's not a list of the 4 powers of confidence. Some of these ideas of confidence do come directly from the Shambhala Tibetan Buddhist formulations of teachings, and also other tantric teachings, from Tibet and the Himalayan region originally. But these are also, as I was really thinking through, because there isn't really a list that I found of like, here is how to build confidence, and that is part of why I wanted to write this book, is that practicing Buddhism feels so much about developing confidence, but it's not, it's sort of implicit rather than explicit in a lot of the Buddhist teachings. So relating it to the 8 worldly winds, and especially there's a practice that comes from the Shambhala and indigenous Tibetan teachings about rousing our confidence, which is called raising a rousing wind horse. And again, the image of wind, in this case, kind of harnessing the winds or riding the energy of the winds, was in my mind. And then just really thought through, like, what are the things that really act as supports, for generating confidence. And I did think compassion, really needed to be in there, and was thinking of parsing some of the themes that come from compassion meditation, especially the practice of Tonglen meditation, compassion for self, receiving compassion for others. And also, whenever we're trying to show up and achieve some purpose or do something difficult, to not let ourselves become myopic, but to say, I also want to do this to be a benefit beyond myself, to self and others. And so I wanted to talk about compassion. Lineage, I think, is such an important theme in the Buddhist teachings, and such an important theme in a lot of wisdom teachings right now. And I think the importance of lineage is, the realization that we are not the first human to have ever faced these dilemmas. Obviously 2024 life is very different than ancient life, and it's probably very different from what life will be 100 years from now. But lineage is this idea of actually being able to call on support from those who have come before. Maybe if we have any belief in invisible beings or bodhisattvas or saints in our ancestors, that we can actually, when we're trying to show up and do something hard, actually call on them for help. And there are visualization practices, especially in the Tibetan lineage, where you actually feel the support of your teachers and ancestors and invisible beings, and you actually call on them to come bless you. And so that, whenever I've felt the most able to contact my confidence in my life, it has been sort of feeling like a sense of, please, come be with me, whether that's, my grandmother, who I mentioned in the chapter, who was a very confident person, whether it was, the great teachers of eras past, whether it was my direct teachers, sometimes you're in my visualization, Sharon. So I think you're in a lot of people's visualization too.
Thank you.
So calling for that support. And then awareness really has to do with the space of mind being this kind of empty, knowing space that holds whatever arises, right? So whatever really arises in the realm of our worldly experience, whatever our struggle is, it's a thought or emotion that arises in awareness, and so tuning in to the fact that whatever we're panicking about, whatever we're struggling with, if we can just tune into the part of ourselves that is observing the struggle, observing the panic, that is not involved in the panic, we can gain more confidence that, hey, the worst thing that can happen to me, honestly, is that I have a difficult thought or emotion. I mean, that's really, from a dharmic standpoint, that's really what's at stake if we feel like we're going to completely fail in some endeavor. The worst thing that can happen to me if I get a 1-star review on Goodreads is I'm going to feel a certain way. And if I can actually tune into my spacious awareness that has a warmth and a love to it, and just observe the fear or observe the hurt or sad feeling like somebody didn't like what I worked on, then I can actually I can hold that experience, and I can put myself out there. Has anyone ever written a book that didn't get a 1-star reviews at some point?
Not me.
Yeah, right. So I think awareness is really important. And then Wind Horse is an actual practice that came from the Shambhala teachings that I wanted to share, because it's a set of different meditations, but they all have a very pithy quality, kind of a brief. You can do them in like 1 minute or 2 minutes or 4 minutes. Sometimes you do them at the beginning of a longer meditation session or the end of a meditation session when you're transitioning into your day or into whatever social experience comes next. You can do them before a difficult conversation. Sometimes I raise Wind Horse like before I speak in front of a group of people. And it's about tuning into one's own experience, tuning into the windy energy of the moment after we've taken our seat, and then feeling our own tenderness towards the experience of being human, and then raising and expanding our awareness outward to meet the moment. And so there's a set of teachings and principles that go with the Wind Horse practice that's really helpful, but it is, in a sense, related to confidence, the best, for me, in my humble experience, the best sort of brief or abrupt meditation practice that I've learned. And so I wanted to kind of close the book with sharing those principles and sharing a short guided version of that practice.
It's wonderful. And actually, I just had another funny dinner with Ethan memory had popped into my mind. You and I were having dinner downtown in Manhattan in this Indian restaurant. It was the early, heady days of social media. So we sat down, we each whipped out our phones in order to post, having dinner with Ethan Nichtern, having dinner with Sharon Salzberg. And somebody in the restaurant recognized you and came up to our table and said, "Are you two going to talk to each other at all? Or are you just going to stay on your phones all night?" So that just came to me.
Yeah, that was funny. Yeah. And that was when Twitter was Twitter, right? Before it became whatever it became. Yeah.
We can write a whole, probably not a book, a pamphlet on dinners with
dinners. Yes.
Dinners together.
My dinners with Sharon.
Yes. Well, thank you. So I also want to mention that I interviewed you along with James Shaheen, who's the editor of Tricycle Magazine, for their podcast, Life as It Is, which is that podcast was very much about your book as well. And that came out in June of 2024. And you spoke in a lot of detail there about the book and particularly the 8 vicissitudes. So those listening might like to check out that interview with you as well. And before you go, I just want to ask you about your life as a dad, which has progressed, through these years since I first saw your daughter and saw you in person.
Yeah. And today, the day we're recording this, is actually her 7th birthday.
Oh.
She's in California today, and so I'll get a chance to celebrate with her this weekend. But yeah, no, I mean, for me, life as a dad, it's very joyful. It is hard work sometimes. It gets easier and easier, and I think from everybody who has more experience as a parent than I say, it goes through the work shifts and sometimes gets lighter and sometimes gets heavier, sometimes more, physical labor, sometimes more psychological or emotional labor. But, what I love about being a parent is I love letting go of perfectionism and just really focusing on coming back to the present moment when I can. And I think that's, one of the things I notice is there's so many theories of parenting. And and I think, a lot of that is because there's a lot of wisdom and there's been a lot of confused parenting, up until this point in human history, along with a lot of lovely and beautiful parenting. But what I love about it is that the theories really do, just like all the theories in the Dharma space, kind of do always collapse into just being present and being relational and mindful with another person. And it also feels like a really good practice in letting somebody be who they are, and that feels really like the most, as a teacher too, like really helping somebody figure out who are you and how can you be present with that and develop the wisdom of that rather than do what I think you should be doing. That's a really wonderful practice. I do listen to more Taylor Swift and Olivia Rodrigo than I ever thought I did, but that's nice too.
Well, on that note, to close out our conversation, I'm hoping you will lead us in a meditation of some kind.
Yeah, let's do just a guided version, and you can find out more about this at the end of Confidence, the book, or have some online courses about it. But we'll do a guided version, just a simple guided version of Raising Wind Horse. So wherever you are as you're listening, take your seat. So that could mean closing your eyes. That could mean leaving them open and downcast. If you're driving, please leave your eyes open on the road. And just whatever has come before, just because this is a brief meditation, let go of any lingering thought for a moment. Just fully come into your seat on earth at this moment. And then really feel the quality of earth. Feel the parts of your body that are connected to the ground, connected to the seat, connected to the earth. Feel that energy. And then feel space. Space is possibility and openness. I'd also call it heaven in the Wind Horse teachings, but just the spacious quality around you. Now feel your heart very fully. Bring your attention into the heart center, that region. See if you can concentrate or focus on the heart. Sometimes concentrating feels intense, so soften and just feel your human heart. Just feel that soft, tender energy at the heart center. This is actually the source of confidence. Now, finally, from that soft, tender heart, imagine your awareness expanding outward. And you could, if you feel comfortable, open your eyes while you do this. So there's a sense of opening out to meet the moment. It's as if awareness radiates from the heart, like the sun. That's it. That's raising wind horse. And now we just go and meet whatever the moment is, whatever comes next with confidence.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for leading that, and thank you for coming. It's so great to be together again, and congratulations again on your new book, Confidence: Holding Your Seat Through Life's 8 Worldly Winds, from New World Library, which is available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook formats and all the places books are sold.
Hey folks, thanks so much for listening. If you would like to learn more about Ethan's work or get a copy of his new book, Confidence, you can head over to his website at ethannichtern.com. That's ETHANNICHTERN.com. And this is not Ethan's first appearance, so if you want to check out some of his other conversations with Sharon, you can dive into the archives. And for all things Sharon, including election resources, classes, all kinds of good stuff, including a free guided meditation, you can head over to SharonSalzberg.com. This has been the Metta Hour podcast, brought to you by the Be Here Now Network. May you be safe, may you be happy, may you be healthy, and may you live with ease.